Hey, so if I were to ask you what are some of the biggest things in your life right now holding you back from where you want to be, I can almost guarantee that one of your first answers is going to have something to do with time. Either I want to do this, but I don't have the time. I used to want to do this, but it's too late. I've missed my opportunity. I've run out of time. It's not going to happen. Or someday I'll do this, but not yet. Now's not the right time. As I look back on my life, I've realized that, really since I was a teenager and really started to seriously think about these things that I wanted in my life, I've had a really distorted and sort of unhealthy view of my own timeline. On one hand, I was way too hard on myself for not reaching certain goals, not doing X, Y, and Z by this time. It was probably an unrealistic goal anyways. But on the other hand, I was not hard enough on myself because I was not setting any clear time limits to create any sense of direction and urgency and what I should wake up and do. So what I want to help you do today is get out of that circle, get out of that vicious cycle of kind of not having a clear direction and then getting hard on yourself that you're not to where you wanted to be by a certain time and then wanting to give up and then wasting time and then getting mad at yourself that you're not where you want to be. If you want to break that cycle, I've got some exercises today to help us set some clear time limits, kind of plot on a bigger continuum, our overarching timeline so that we can wake up on any given day and say, yeah, you know what? I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm where I'm supposed to be today. And when you can see that in any given day, any given moment, kind of provide that grace to yourself and understand where you are in the context of your larger story, you're way less likely to give up and you're way more likely to make some real progress and reach that ultimate goal that's a little bit further down the road. So if that sounds good to you, you're in the right place. Welcome to episode 6 of Me and the Quest. Well, hey, what's going on? I'm really glad you're here. My name is Ben Crosswaite, and this is Me and the Quest. This is a show about doing big, meaningful things in the world, making big, important changes in ourselves, and ultimately spending more time doing what we're alive to do. And that idea actually of time and how we spend it and how we think about it is the whole idea of this episode. For a while, I've had this episode sort of on my to-do list that I knew I wanted to do it within the first 12 episodes, which is what I'm considering season 1. And for a long time, I was calling it time limits. That was sort of just my shorthand, calling it a time limit episode. Because that was the first element when I started thinking about my idea of framing my life more like an epic quest. One of the first things I started to do was set my time limit, which is March 18th, 2023, which is when I turned 30. So I have some specific goals to reach by that time. But I've since learned that time limits are actually only kind of one half of the equation. So I actually want to do more than just set a time limit. I want to talk about this idea of a timeline and how at any given moment, being able to look at your overarching story and see where you are in relationship to where you want to go, sort of all the benefits that can have to help us not get too discouraged about where we find ourselves in any given moment, to continually walk with a sense of direction and knowing where we're going. So that's where we're headed with this episode. I just sort of teased this idea that I'm thinking about these first 12 episodes as season 1. This is episode 6, so we're halfway there. So just sort of to show where I'm seeing this thing go. My plan is to continually make an episode every week through 12 episodes. We'll probably take a really short break in there after 12 episodes and then jump into season 2. Around season 2, we'll start to mix in episodes with guests, and then I'll continue to do some of these solo episodes. And I would also like to do some episodes where it's more like Q&A and working with people who are listening to the show and what is kind of questions that come up for you, and maybe even, as I try to help you kind of craft your version of your quest, then sharing some of that on the show to kind of just show how this can work practically. So it's not just about me, it's kind of bringing other people in. So that's where the show is headed in the next little bit. Like I said, look for some guests in the next couple of months. Just excited about where this thing's going. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen or watch. Thanks so much for being here and being a part of it. Let's jump into Act 1, where we're going to talk about what is the problem that we're trying to face down and solve in this episode. So as I mentioned at the very top of the episode, I think one of the main go-tos for most of us when asked about, what problems we're facing in our lives that are kind of holding us back from where we want to be, most of us are going to answer something about time and our relationship to it. Not enough of it. We feel like it's too late. We feel like it's not time yet. Our relationship to time, very few of us, I feel like, have a healthy one, right? And I'm still very much working on this, but it's only been in the last year or so where I feel like I've made some big progress here, and it's really helping. So I want to talk about this idea of the problem. Like, what's the problem for this episode? How I would sum it up for me in the past has been a distorted view of my own timeline and sort of just a mess. Like, I was critical of myself in all these different ways that didn't really make sense. Like, I was both too young and too old, right? Depending on the moment. Like, oh, I'm too old to do that. Oh, I'm too young to do that. Like, oh, I'm never going to make it. Oh, it's not time yet. Like, without having any sort of intentional structure, you're very quickly start to just compare yourself to other people's timelines. Like right now, for example, like the biggest song in the world right now is this song called Driver's License, which is a really, really, really great song. I think it deserves all the acclaim it's getting. But written and performed by a 17-year-old. So, I could look at that right now and be like, like she's 17 and like blew up and made this amazing song. Like, it's too late for me, right? Like, I'm a decade older than her. It's too late for me. Like, I give up. But when I was 17, there was plenty of things I wanted to do where I was like, man, you're too young. Like, you're not going to be taken seriously. And all of that is because it's a lack of an intentional timeline for myself. And so I kind of look to other people and I can start comparing myself to other people's timelines. And sometimes too, what you do is when you don't have an intentional timeline for yourself, you allow other people, whether that's just sort of cultural expectations or it's your parents or it's your friends or whatever, that are going to kind of impose their timeline on you. I've definitely spent way too much of my time in this vicious circle of like, oh, I'm not where I want to be yet, and sort of beat myself up and then kind of get in the dumps and like waste more time and then get mad at myself that I wasted a bunch of time. And it's just this perpetual cycle of sort of spinning my wheels and not having any clear direction and frankly just wasting a bunch of time. And I got really tired of wasting a bunch of time. I got tired of being at a certain stage and being like, oh man, if only like 3 years ago I had been more intentional, like I could be here by now. But instead I'm like still way back here because I spent so much time sort of aimlessly wondering. I spent so much time beating myself up about how I wasn't to where I wanted to be, but like not doing anything about it. And all of that, I think there's all the sorts of factors. But part of it was I didn't have a clear timeline. I didn't have any clear time limits, any sort of goals that like by this time I want to have this be true of me. It was too abstract. It was like I have a sense that like I have this gnawing sense that by now I should be more successful, or I should have had this opportunity, or this should be true of me, or I should have more money in my bank account, whatever it is. So yeah, I hope that can start to paint the picture for what I'm talking about here as the problem. When you're unintentional about setting any sort of clear timeline, you beat yourself up because you're not where you want to be yet. You don't make the actual progress because there's no sense of urgency. And then those two sort of play on each other, that you're like beating yourself up because you're not where you want to be, and you're not where you want to be because you're not setting any clear goals. And it's this cycle. And we waste a whole bunch of time. And what I want this show to be about is a lot of it is about making the most of our time on the planet. It's about living a meaningful life, living with intentionality, with some purpose. And so I want this episode, like I want every episode, to be about making sure we're not wasting our time here. And this is not just about like what we're not achieving. This is about how this makes us feel. When we don't have a clear timeline, we beat ourselves up, and that feels bad. When we don't have a clear timeline, we have that gnawing but like abstract sense that I'm not where I'm supposed to be. Like I should be further along. I should be somewhere else. I should have accomplished more by now, or this should be true of me by now. But it's when we're not clear about our timeline and our overarching story that we're living, that gnawing sense of that discomfort, that unfulfillment, that feeling like we're wasting our lives, is too abstract to really address, because it's just this sort of, like I said, gnawing sense, very abstract, very like nebulous, like something's not, like I'm not where I'm supposed to be, but there's no action to take because it's not plotted out clear enough. So that's what I want to accomplish here. I want to alleviate that discomfort of like that gnawing sense of I'm not where I'm supposed to be. This should be true of me by now, and it's not. I want to get rid of that crappy feeling, and I want to help, accomplish some concrete things, not too far down the road, but far enough down the road that you can actually make it happen. So let's talk about how we do this. Like, what do we need to implement to make some progress here? All right, so what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this problem? How are we going to overcome it? What we need to do is, when we think about these things that we want to be true of our lives, these career goals, health goals, relationship goals, personal inner transformation goals, we need to plot that out on a timeline. On one end, I want us to have the deadline, the time limit. On the far end is us right now, where we find ourselves today, and everything in between, all that space, is the timeline. So the goal of the time limit is to give us a sense of urgency, to give us some direction, and to serve as a filter, about how we spend our time, what we say yes to, what we say no to. Because when there's that sense of urgency, that sense of this has to be true of me by this time, even if it's somewhat arbitrary, like my goals are based around my 30th birthday. I'm not a birthday person. I don't really care. It's just a number. But it was convenient. My 30th birthday, this, and this, there's some career goals, there's some money goals, there's some family goals, there's some inner, just personal health, internal, emotional health goals, all by my 30th birthday. And even though that's pretty arbitrary, like I've set that as my goal, I've been working with that as a goal for over a year now. And it helps me filter what I say yes to, what I say no to, how I spend my time. And then that's the goal of the time limit. The goal of the timeline, which is where you sort of reverse engineer. This is the time limit. This is where I am today. We're going to kind of reverse engineer, fill in all the other stuff, all the subplots, if you will, markers along the way. The goal of that timeline is to help rid us of that abstract sense that like I'm not where I should be. Perfect example is this show right now. It would be really easy for me to look at my small viewership and say, wow, I'm putting a bunch of time and thought into this, emotional energy, physical energy, time into, and even a little bit of money, to host the podcast, things like that. That's a lot going into something for a small viewership. So if I only looked at that, I'd be like, this is not where I'm supposed to be. I'm going to, jump ship and do something else. But instead I can look at it in the much larger overview of like, oh yeah, this is actually where I should be. I've made only 5 episodes. I've hardly marketed it, It's really early on. I haven't had any guests on my show to help promote it. Like, yeah, this makes sense. And then, this is my plan for season 1. This is my plan for season 2. This is my plan for the rest of 2021. This is my hopes for where it could be in 2022, all building toward sort of a bigger goal and a longer term commitment. That gives me peace of mind knowing that, like, yeah, it's a small viewership and it's a lot of work for only a handful of people right now. But this is where I'm supposed to be on the continuum of my larger story. So it gives me that peace of mind. It helps me, and that does 2 things. It keeps me from giving up, and it helps me actually like make progress because I'm not wasting so much time thinking that I'm wasting time. It's like this funny thing, right? Because you're like, it's actually an interesting way I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but basically I think I'm wasting time because I'm like, this is, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. This is a bad idea. So I'm going to give up. And then I actually do waste time, right? So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. So the timeline is there to kind of help us know that in any given moment, am I where I'm supposed to be right now? And maybe it's a little bit off, maybe I'm a little bit behind the pace, and I can adjust, either just, try to catch up, or I can just adjust all the subsequent goals. Or maybe I'm right where I need to be. And I felt like I was really behind. I felt like I should be further along by now, but then I can step back. Again, so much of what I'm talking about lately has been trying to get to that more objective place, where I'm not so much in the emotion of it and in the thick of the day to day, and to be able to say, no, like actually on my big, my 6 month, my 1 year, my 3 year plan, whatever your length of time is, I'm actually right where I'm supposed to be, right? Like, think about something that's easy to quantify, like a weight loss goal. You could easily, after like 2 weeks, say, oh, I've only lost like 4 pounds and my goal is to lose 40. It's like, yeah, but it's been 2 weeks and you said you were going to, this was a 3 months, a 6 month, a year long commitment, right? Or maybe just you said as long as it takes, like I'm going to keep going. And then 2 weeks in, you're like, I haven't lost all the weight. I want to like back to how it was before. And I have done this so many times with like creative ideas of like, this didn't really take off like I wanted to. It's like, so I'm not going to give up. It's like, it's been a week, dude. Like, don't jump ship yet. So that's the goal of that timeline, right? Creating these subplots within the large overall goal. So for me, like, because I set basically a 3-year plan, I assigned a general theme to 2020, to 2021, and to 2022. And like already, right? I'm not even done. I'm not even out of January yet. And already there are moments where I'm like kind of get that itch to like do something different, to change course, to give up on this and try this instead. I'm like, it's January. Like, you've got 11 more months of this plan, keep going. You're where you're meant to be. You're where you're supposed to be. Just zoom out a bit, and remember the overarching goal, and remember that, this is, this is chapter 3 out of, 20 or whatever. This is the first half hour of a 2.5 hour movie, right? Like, we're just getting started. And so that'll help you, number one, sort of alleviate that internal, dread, that sense that I'm not where I'm supposed to be. That's a crappy feeling. And it also will help you just stay the course and actually get to where you're meant to go, opposed to that constant cycle of giving up because you're like, well, I haven't reached it yet, so I'm never going to reach it, so I'm going to give up. So that's the goal. What we need to do is we need to create a time limit, and then reverse engineer from there, sort of fill in the timeline, the continuum that we can look at and say, okay, like 3 months from now, where do I want to be? A year from now, where do I want to be? Next week. You can do this in a more micro way too. All right, so I hope that helps. You've got time limit and you've got the timeline. So let's wrap up and talk a little bit about what I think might be some good specifics about like how long and how to kind of flesh this out. So as I've been saying, my goal is a 1,000-day goal, basically a 3-year plan, because I actually kind of started working toward it even before I started the official 1,000-day countdown. So it's basically a 3-year plan. So one of my big suggestions would be that whatever length you decide on for your sort of big time limit for your big overarching goal, is to then break that down into 3 acts, kind of like we do here on the podcast, a 3-act structure. So as I look at my plan, just to kind of give you an example, basically, 2020 was about starting. And really, if it was one word, it was that word. It was starting. It was about getting a good concept that I liked. It was about just kind of going public and starting to have people hold me accountable, like I talked about in last week's episode 5, this idea of inciting incidents, like a bunch of inciting incidents to make sure I was following through and taking action in different areas. It was about starting. And I did that. I got things going. 2021 for me is about creating as much stuff as possible. It's about being really consistent on this podcast. It's about With my music, I'm trying to do more collaboration. I'm still working on launching like a sort of a little brand to try to bring in more freelance production and like music mentoring and private music lessons online to try to bring in more leads for that. It's about kind of casting as many different nets as I can and sort of a broad reach. And then 2022, basically what I want to do is evaluate what's working, sort of where I found some traction amidst all these different things I'm doing. And then in 2022, probably cut some things out and double down on some other things. And like 2021, I'm really not trying to monetize too much of anything. 2022, again, I'm trying to see where I'm getting some traction and start to try to monetize that more to make it more of a viable thing to do, going forward. So you can sort of see like right now, because I'm in 2021 and I was saying that my goal for 2021 is just to create a bunch of stuff to gradually grow. But it's really just about putting in the work, being consistent. I can say like, if I get frustrated that things aren't like, why am I doing this? This is a waste of time because no one's watching. Like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm at the very, very beginning of this season of life where my goal is just to create and not to, I don't get to step back and like evaluate if it's a waste of time or not. Like I decided this is where I'm going. So, wake up and put in the work. And later we can have time to stop and evaluate. So think about for you what a 3-act structure could look like. If it's a health goal, is it, what is the first actions you can take to just start getting some momentum? And then what is that middle act going to look like where you're really starting to put in the work on a really consistent and like making it a part of your life and making some real long-term changes? And then what's like that third act going to look like where, do you run a marathon? Like, are you going to compete in some competition? Like what is that big climactic third act going to look like for you in your health goal? A career change. It's like act 1 is maybe you're just starting to learn this new skill. Act 2 is you're going to start to really, number one, like to both hone that skill, and you're going to start to kind of get feelers out for this other industry you're going to make the jump in. And then act 3 is when you're going to start applying for new jobs and you're going to quit your job that you currently have and you're going to make the leap, right? So how can you break down that long-term goal into that 3-act structure? As far as how long, how far out your time limit should be, I think it probably does really depend on your situation. If you're inclined to think like, oh, it's only like 3 months, it's only 6 months, I would wonder if that's only really like the first act of a bigger story. Like if it's only 3 months away, like maybe it's a health goal. Like maybe that's the health part of a bigger story that you're embarking on. Cause like maybe the first act of your bigger story is to get healthier, but then the second act is to, use that newfound confidence to make these other changes in your life. And then act 3 is like this big thing you've always wanted to do. So if, as you've been listening, you're like, well, what I want to do is only going to take like 2 months. I would just encourage you to think about like, if that's maybe only the first step of a bigger story. And then of course, like don't go too far the other way. I think anything more than about 3 years. I mean, I know like the whole idea of like a 5-year plan is a pretty common idea. But just make sure that if you're going on a like multi-years out, break it down into sub like an 3-act structure. And then I would say, break those acts down into smaller chunks, and measurable goals within those chunks, right? So I really have liked this 1,000-day goal, 3-year plan approximately. Yeah, like if you've got a nice round birthday coming up in the next 2 to 4 years, if you've got some other sort of life change, your kids are going to move out, or you're going to hit some milestone at work, or whatever it is, like if there's something that you can kind of look at in the next 2 to 3 years, that's like a milestone that you can, even if it is somewhat arbitrary, like a 30th birthday, again, who really cares? Most of my friends are already well into their 30s or into their 40s. So it's like, if anything, I should kind of be looking forward to it because I won't feel like the young guy maybe as much. But for me, if you want to just steal mine, 1,000 days, 2-3 years, it's felt really nice for me. And I feel like it's given me a sense of urgency, but in any given day, I don't feel overwhelmed. Like, oh, I have so much to do. I only have 780 days left, right? So it's giving me that push, giving me that urgency and direction, but it's not overwhelming or too stressful, right? So feel free to take my length, 1,000 days. It's a good number. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this. If you are getting anything out of it, I'd love to hear from you. At Me in the Quest on Instagram, comment on YouTube, leave reviews, 5 stars, all that on the podcast apps. That is super, super helpful. The epilogue for today, the conversation after the main episode, I'm actually kind of keeping it somewhat thematic today. I want to talk about the spiritual practice of having a calendar. So if you want to know what I mean by that, stick around for the epilogue. So I'm just going to kind of leave that there. And if you're intrigued, make sure that if you are on YouTube, you click the video that is popping up somewhere on the screen. And if you're listening to the podcast, just sit back and we'll jump into the epilogue conversation.